I think it's a good idea to now invite Atoosa Kasirzadeh to give her presentation. She is a assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and very interestingly for me, has joint affiliations in the philosophy department and in the software and societal systems department. She has published across philosophy, ethics, and governance of AI and computational sciences, and she too has been affiliated with quite a few really, very relevant research centers operating in this area of AI governance and society. So over to you, Atoosa. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much, Kasirzadeh, for such a fantastic presentation. I am going to share my slides, and I think, can you see my slides full screen? Okay, great. So I want to start by giving you a little bit of a background about myself. I think that would really help to situate the perspective I'm coming from, and also some of the methodologies I've adopted in this co-authored paper with my fantastic, currently postdoc at CMU, Balint Gaivnar. So I started my academic journey as an engineer. And so in engineering, like as an undergraduate engineering student, one of the first courses that we take is technical safety or technological safety under different kinds of headings in different syllabus. But the idea being that any engineering student, anyone who is developing engineered products, needs to think about safety. And later on, I became very interested in history and philosophy of science and technology. So I did my PhD at the University of Toronto at IHPSD, which is a institute full of historians, sociologists, and philosophers. But I've been more interested in looking philosophically at various different questions, while very much being aware of the social power dynamics as well. So in this paper and in this particular work that I'm going to present, I and my student asked the following question. Well, first, our starting point was like, if for any engineering system, we talk about safety, and AI is an engineered system, we should talk about its safety. So in that sense, the notion of AI safety is a very a technical term. Obviously, as Kasirzadeh put it out clearly, there is a particular community that has been formed around this particular topic over the past, say, 2 decades, 2 decades and a half, more specifically. But we wanted to look at this question from a different angle, acknowledging that understanding what AI safety is a very complex endeavor, and we need to take various different steps, to adopt different dimensions in order to get a comprehensive image, if at all possible, of what this particular term really means. But we wanted to look into the published research that people have put out in order to understand what engineers, especially those who were interested in peer-reviewed work, have contributed towards AI safety. So that's been our starting position. And so, we became very interested in this question, let's say in 2030. Before that, I would identify myself as a member of the AI ethics community. I have to say I don't have that sort of a strong identification anymore, but I've been working on societal impacts of AI, and I've been publishing in venues that typically AI ethicists would publish at. And AI safety was something that some other people would do, super technical. I think, as Kasirzadeh said, not much connected to critical computing, philosophy, sociology of technology, science. But then in 2023, the whole topic, 2022, 2023, the whole topic came to the public attention. And then we had the AI Safety Summit, the first AI Safety Summit in the UK. And then various different institutions were pumped up, various different research centers were created. And I guess the public discourse heard about this term like much more. Then what happened was that there were a couple of, I would say, more radical extreme figures in the field of AI ethics started making very special claims about AI safety that I personally would not necessarily agree with. So one of them, Professor Bender, for example, there's a tweet from her to all those folks asking why the AI safety and AI safety crowds can't find common ground. It's simple, the AI safety angle, which takes AI as something that is to be raised or to be aligned with actual people, is anathema to ethical development of the technology. I felt very unhappy and unsatisfied about this particular formulation. I could see where she comes from, but I did not agree with this particular formulation. The reason was that I started actually working with some AI safety researchers, and I ended up understanding that the dynamics of various different communities around AI safety is quite complex. In particular, the relationship between members of EA and AI safety community and rationalist community, various other communities as well, is actually quite complex. And I became very interested in looking at and just understanding the engineers who very much care about the future, very much care about AI system, not in a very loaded way. I wanted to understand how it is possible to think about AI safety in a more grounded way, and maybe not, and it shouldn't be maybe the case that all of us need to kind of like always try to go polarized and just like figure out, oh, AI safety, AI ethics do not have any like common grounds, things like that. Yeah, and then of course there's been various different issues, problems around effective altruism and long-termism, etc. And as I guess Shahzada very nicely put out, there are some particular brandings of AI safety coming from effective altruists, etc. But I was interested in, again, taking a very different perspective. And the idea was like, is it the case that some people actually are publishing peer-reviewed papers about AI safety in the same way that engineers have been publishing about technological safety for ages? And so we asked this particular type of question. And the reason we asked this question was because we were kind of concerned that a lot of people from various different communities wants to make this inherent connection between existential risk from AI and AI safety, basically putting forward the claim that the goal of AI safety is the mitigation of existential risk from advanced AI or AGI or ASI. I would say, according to my understanding and findings, a part of the AI safety community wants to mitigate existential risk from AI. They basically give their or find their identity in relation to that particular goal. They would say, we are AI safety researchers. It means that we want to mitigate existential risk from AI. But I was not convinced that we have to take them for granted and then have the conclusion that in general, AI safety researchers wants to mitigate existential risk from artificial superintelligence. So we kind of figured that actually this whole framing of AI safety being in the service of mitigating existential risk from artificial superintelligence has three potential drawbacks. One of them, it may exclude actually researchers and practitioners who are committed to the safety of technological systems, including AI systems, but approach the field from very different angles. They don't care about existential risk. They are completely neutral about ASI or artificial general intelligence. The second drawback is that it could lead the public to mistakenly view AI safety as focused only on existential scenarios rather than addressing a wide spectrum of safety challenges. So we think that actually there are many different safety challenges among AI systems, and the public should come to the realization that the safety of AI systems is very important, but not necessarily the conception of AI safety that X-risk super alignment people are putting forward. And the third is that this framing risks creating resistance to safety measures among those who disagree with predictions of existential AI risk. And I personally have been very concerned about this last kind of drawback. And so here, this means that if the public agrees that AI safety means whoever is an AI safety researcher, that person wants to mitigate existential risk from ASI, that kind of conception would kind of like prevent a big chunk of public to care about safety risk and safety concerns, and would just say, okay, because those scenarios like super intelligent coming killing us all, whatever, those scenarios are either very science fiction or they are tied to some communities or cults that we are not interested in. Therefore, we develop this sort of an allergy to AI safety whenever we hear that. So I was just like very much concerned with that. And so the idea was like, we need to re-engineer the concept of AI safety, and we need to inform the public about a proper conception of AI safety. How should we do that? Well, let's see what researchers have done, primarily peer-reviewed researchers on AI safety. And as a result of our empirical investigations, let's contextualize AI safety within this broader technological kind of practice. So we asked two questions in order to run this empirical analysis or meta literature review. The first question was like, what types of risks related to the life cycle, and by that we mean design, development, deployment, operation, and decommissioning of AI systems are addressed in AI safety research. Second question, what mitigation strategies actually are proposed in recent AI safety research that directly addresses one or more of the above sources of AI risks? And so what we found was that, again, when we look at primarily peer-reviewed research on AI safety, there is a broad spectrum of concerns throughout AI development and deployment that, according to those our findings, people are concerned with when they write about the safety of AI systems. And the second is that there are various different mathematical methods, computational tools, and algorithms that are being developed for addressing safety issues in AI systems. So this is what we did. We ran this query process. It was finalized on November 2023. But in a follow-up paper, my student and I, we are comparing actually publications in AI safety and AI ethics. So at the moment, the papers we've collected is much bigger, and so soon we will publish an updated version of these findings. But basically, we went very kind of like inclusive with what AI safety could mean, again, from an engineering sort of a standpoint or perspective. And so the query process included terms like AI or AGI or frontier AI or artificial superintelligence, various different types of learning systems. For safety, we use terms like safe star or a robust star or aligned star. And then we kind of like had query 3, query 4, basically develop according to a combination of Q1 and Q2. And then you can have a look at the other sub questions that we ask for Q4. And so here are some of the impression of some of our findings. This is like a word cloud of the like basically of morphologically standardized terms that occurred in the abstract and titles of selected papers. So you see terms like model, robust, learn, system, algorithm, train, etc. Here is a graph of term co-occurrences, again in abstract. Obviously, we adopted our own biases when we wanted to run these computational studies. The good thing is that we have open sourced both the data sets and our code, so you can just play around with the code or add other various different papers in order to maybe replicate these results in various different ways according to different parameters. But here what you observe is that we are observing, let's say, like 4 different clusters of sort of concerns that appear when we look at the papers that we've collected. There's a cluster of research and papers around like reinforcement learning, another cluster around like artificial intelligence, cooperation, society, person, health, responsibility. These are topics that I guess, as Shahzadeh mentioned, maybe are not necessarily discussed in the community conception of AI safety. So maybe AI safety community is not concerned about it. But when we look at the published papers that are published by people who are not a member of that community or something, they actually are working on questions around health, etc. as well. There are topics around like accident classifiers, super vector machines, various different technical work, and then a chunk of like research on attacks, adversarial attacks, benchmark data sets, evaluations, etc. Then we looked at the particular types of risk types. Most of them are formulated in terms of technical notions, but I guess they all also would make sense in non-technical notions. So here is a list of like 8 risk types that we found. So they talk about like undesirable behavior of different AI systems, non-stationary distributions, the adversarial attacks, basically when the system is not completely robust against adversarial attacks, the unsafe exploitation, lack of control enforcement, system misspecification, lack of monitoring, and noise and outliers. And I'll be happy to talk about the details of each of this in the Q&A if you have questions. And then we look at the number and percentage of the selected papers that address various risk types. As you see, there are various publications around like noise and outliers. This is a topic that is like super core to the design of engineering systems, so cyber systems, cybersecurity, etc., that has been around since decades ago. So then you can basically see like a decomposition of various different papers in this space. And also like the papers that we picked primarily were published from like 2015 onwards. One other thing that I actually forgot to say, which is important, we also adopted a snowball sampling methodology, meaning that we started also incorporating some of the non-peer reviewed papers on arXiv that have been extremely influential. By influential, we mean they have been cited like many, many different times. And so we kind of included some of the non-peer reviewed papers as well, in order to counterbalance our maybe very biased perspectives, the perspective that we are just looking at the peer-reviewed AI safety papers. And some people could say, well, actually AI safety researchers don't like to publish or don't publish in peer-reviewed venues. So you're studying different phenomena, you call it AI safety. We wanted to counter that kind of a conception, and we wanted to defend the idea that what we study is publications in AI safety, but we are also going to include some of the highly cited non-peer-reviewed papers as well into the list of papers that we are studying here. And then we wanted to have a look at like how many of these publications are like include primarily like speculative results, including, let's say, just philosophy results. Papers that are just like, oh, we have to do this in order to mitigate existential risk from AGI without really giving like any concrete suggestions, and how many of them are actually papers that try to engage with some either hypothetical systems with algorithms. They have some formal computational results, and so these are some of the findings we've had. And then okay, and then we looked at the distribution of different categories of research. And so just basically we wanted to go a little bit more fine-grained as compared to the previous slide that I showed you. We wanted to go a bit more fine-grained. And so we wanted to see, okay, what percentage of these papers are just like philosophical papers? What percentage are just literature reviews? What percentage just really care about like the deployment of current systems? And so these are some of our findings. And basically the findings suggest that we have a lot of like algorithmic technical work, but then also some work that are more like frameworks or like philosophical, etc. Again, I want to here acknowledge that these we finished the collection of the papers that I presented the analysis on in 2023, and since then there's been loads of papers that have been published in peer review, non-peer review from various different corporate entities or AI labs, etc. So the corpus of papers that we are now looking at includes 1,700 AI safety papers. The corpus of papers that we looked at by November 2023 only included around 350 papers. So you need to kind of like take the results that we're suggesting with a grain of salt. But I think what is very novel and what we wanted to suggest here is to say that, okay, like it is true that there is a lot of there's a lot of value in studying AI safety community from a sociological, anthropological perspective. It's very important. We need to do more of those. But we also maybe need to, in order to really understand the complexity of AI safety, we need to adopt other methodologies and try to really look at what is coming out of them in terms of technical values, technical algorithms, etc. Even if you want to keep criticizing them, I think that kind of an information is very important, valuable. Open questions. There is this concept of socio-technical AI safety that is not at all defined. Some people refer to me as a socio-technical AI safety researcher. Alondra Nelson, Cez Lazar are some people who have coined this term, but I guess the term basically refer to people who work on AI safety research, but not necessarily in the way that the mainstream AI safety community is promoting. We have not at all engaged with this notion or concept of socio-technical AI safety and its implication in this paper. That requires further investigation. As I think Shahzada mentioned, a huge, maybe the majority of work that has come out of the AI safety community has been posted, published in various different blog posts, like Less Wrong is one example, Alignment Forum, etc. We wanted to engage with those forums, but it's kind of impossible to really comb through the content generated there in a proper way. So I hope there are some sociologists, anthropology PhD students who would take that effort and just like really try to understand what those communities have said on those communities, and would hopefully use some computational or empirical or qualitative methods to understand the content that is being produced there. And again, as I mentioned, our empirical analysis is really just one step in understanding a complex practice. We have a follow-up paper in which we are trying to actually compare a selection of papers that we've collected from the AI ethics community, a selection of papers that we've collected from the AI safety community, the way we have reconstructed or constructed that term. And then our goal in this new paper, hopefully coming out soon, is to just see what are the commonalities between these two communities, what types of specific problems and methodologies the communities are concerned with, and what are the significant points of differences and disagreements. I'm going to stop here, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Atoosa. That was great. And also throwing up lots of issues I see that Andy Sterling has a question. So to start with, would be great, Andy, if you could, if you
Well, sure. I'm
pose
sorry
it.
if I'm sorry I'm asking probably too much given my level of knowledge, but thanks for a really great talk again. What I wanted to ask picks up on Nurture's point about the importance of differences in wider safety discourse um, with other areas of technology between a risk focus and a hazard focus. And one aspect of that contrast is the very problematic assumptions in a risk focus that probabilistic calculus offers not only meaningful but often effectively complete responses. And for their part, the hazard-based approaches tend to highlight neglected forms of uncertainty and ambiguity and ignorance that are just not even in principle addressed by probabilistic analysis. But this talk has made reference in the AI field, and it reinforces my limited knowledge that it's populated mainly by risk-based approaches. So does that imply then that this risk-based blinkers, assuming the applicability of probabilities, is even more intense in AI than it is, albeit disastrously, elsewhere?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy. This is such a great question and a very hard question. So I can tell you how I think about this question. So I was involved in 2021 with Google DeepMind. At that time, we were trying to develop a taxonomy of the risk of harm from large language models. And the concept of risk that we adopted in that kind of a paper, and I think a lot of the taxonomy papers went in the same direction, was quite sort of qualitative. And then by risk, we meant risk of harm. So, for example, disinformation is a type of risk, and it's a kind of risk of harm as well. And also, even before our paper, the stochastic parrot paper also kind of like adopted that sort of a qualitative conception of risk of harm. So my understanding is that at least over the past like 5 years in the AI community or social impact of AI community, the concept of risk has been or should be understood, has been developed in a very like a broad way. So when people talk about, oh, like this system is risky, many of them do not have actually a probabilistic concept of it. Right. But another, like the reason that your question adds complexity is that most of the analysis that people do uses probabilities. Their motivation is like, all of these systems, all of the deep neural networks, whatever complex system you take, they are statistical systems at heart. And so if you want to talk about the behavior of statistical systems at heart, you have to use statistical or probabilistic notions. And so then in some sense, when even if you accept with what I say, that like some people adopt a qualitative notion of risk, when you ask them about particular numbers or particular concepts coming from the behavior of the systems, all those responses would become probabilistically. Now, in the AI community, very interestingly, there are researchers who are actually pushing forward for the development of verifiable or like safe guarantees, safety guarantees for AI systems. So they want to say, hey, these probabilistic notions that you are giving us actually are not sufficient, or these probabilistic guarantees you're giving us are not sufficient, because typically the disaster doesn't always happen. There are like this, maybe 0.0001%, there's a chance that a disaster or like misaligned behavior or malbehavior would happen. So you need to actually give us, or like the AI developers need to give us like guarantees. And those guarantees are formal guarantees. It means that there is no probabilistic error allowed, right? And so in the alignment community, it's also very interesting. Some people are now like adopting two various different standards. Like, so some people say, well, aligned enough is sufficient, and some other people say, no, we need to have like perfect alignment. And I think that is another kind of a topic that I'm writing on a philosophical paper about, like what types of standards or thresholds we are accepting, or we accept as a society, who should adopt or who should set the threshold in order to decide whether a system is safe enough or like perfectly safe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, thanks. Just quickly, there's a great response. The risk idiom is not only problematic when it's actually delivered in quantitative terms, even in interpretive or qualitative terms, it still has that implication that the ontology is singular, a bit like alignment, is imposing a notion that the problems is singular, and it's just a question of characterizing that singular problem properly. Whereas uncertainty, ambiguity, and ignorance are much more invite attention to pluralities that are irreducible. So even when it's qualitative, it seems to still, I don't know if you agree, it still seems to suffer from that shared difficulty.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also want to give a shout out again to Shahzada, and a very important point that she mentioned. Again, I think all of us agree that a lot of the topics that are being discussed in this whole space of alignment, safety, etc., require adopting very like rigid, meaningful concepts that come from philosophy, anthropology, like sociology, etc. What happens is that most of the time, some computer scientists pick their whatever topic, they give it an operational definition. A huge literature is going to be built on this, and so when we arrive at that literature, like I feel like a big chunk of my whole work has been like really trying to correct the concepts that has been used and has been adopted by a particular community. Like, why do you adopt this particular conception of existential risk, even if you want to talk about existential risk?
Right.
Why do you talk about alignment? I mean, Shahzada mentioned it very well, but even if you look at that concept from an abstract philosophical perspective, there is no rigid definition, even no rigid operational definition.
Right.
And I think that has really harmed the community, the community that works on societal impacts of AI, because we arrive at this whole field and we just figure that, oh my God, we can't even understand the concepts that people are using to talk about this. And the whole chunk of the works of the sociologists, philosophers, etc., becomes in correcting those concepts. And it's not even clear if our corrected concepts would be adopted by that community. And that's why I think, as we all know, again, I just want to emphasize why it is extremely important to do meaningful interdisciplinary involved research. It's just because the building up of the responsible AI, whatever that means, would be on a much firmer conceptual ground.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Over to Jack.
Thanks, Norcha, and thank you both for those talks, which I guess my question is about trying to draw the connections between. I'd be really interested to hear what Shahzada has to say, in particular in response to Atoosa's talk. But one of the sort of details of Atoosa's talk really grabbed me, which is, Atoosa, you had this pragmatic motivation for the exploration that you were doing, which I think those of us that have seen regulatory battles around AI will recognize, which is that the sort of existential risk frame that seems so strange to people outside this world politically could be extremely brittle, right? That it doesn't take much for somebody to just say, well, we don't believe you because that sounds extreme, or that sounds ridiculous, and then the whole sort of argument seems to unravel. Shahzada's talk was about, focuses, I think, rightly on epistemic communities, but I think we could equally talk about political communities, political coalitions, and we could add a sort of pragmatic concern, which I've heard from AI people, that no matter which risks you prioritize, maybe the things that you would do in terms of coalition building, in terms of lawmaking, in terms of accountability practices, whatever it is, might be the same. And maybe then the pragmatic challenge is, the pragmatist might put it as the point is not to get people to think the same thing, but to get people to act in the same way, right? And so I just wonder, I mean, maybe this is more of a question to Shahzada, but do you buy that argument, that sort of pragmatic argument, that even if you don't, agree with the framing of the risk, there might be pragmatic reasons why the community say the things that they do, and that opens up a political space for the consideration of all sorts of problematizations?
Atoosa, did you want to go first? I feel like Jack started by asking you, but I have some
Well,
thoughts
maybe
on
you should, Shazida,
Okay,
you go
sure.
first, and then Atoosa.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad. I feel like I look at Atoosa's work and I see how you're trying to make a field better, right? You're trying to make it more rigorous. You do take the problems like seriously. And what's interesting, like in all of this, is there are political assumptions being made that don't get named, right? And that's also really tricky. And so going to Jack's question of like existential risk as a phrase, it's like visceral, right? People, policymakers especially, who are not reading any of this as closely as we are moved by it, it can, play to their fears of AI in part because it's something they don't always understand, right? But yeah, I think with Atoosa's work, what's so interesting, and as I was thinking about it too, it's like, I'm wondering why the peer-reviewed literature takes the direction it does, and if there's a way to track how much of it cites the non-peer-reviewed work, how much of it, it might cite some of the blog posts, it might take inspiration from those things and then still try to formalize them and still try to bring them back in conversation with like more, just disciplinary methods. Because I'm just like, there is an interplay between those two things. And I think it is interesting that you still manage to pull out and say, like, here's what the peer-reviewed work is actually doing. It's not often referencing X risk, even if some of those people do believe X risk is the thing they're fighting. But the other thing I wanted to point out, and maybe this doesn't answer your question directly, Jack, too, it's like, as we're reading the value alignment papers, it's interesting to see how much of the training takes place on data sets that these people did not curate themselves and are often data sets of like, here's an LLM prompt and here are two responses to it. And human raters, or sometimes increasingly like LLMs as a judge, will rate which one is better than the other. And then that gets abstracted away of like, well, we use these like state of the art, like we use the benchmark someone else made. I feel like all of this is calling for us to go deeper, 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 closer on every step of that process to understand, is the final claim made, right? Even going back to your point of, is there perfect alignment or good enough alignment? It's like sometimes people are forgetting alignment to what? And I think that's also kind of missing in this space. And yeah, just a lot of the assumptions and like cultural inbuilt ideas around the kinds of data sets we're even training to align things to is just a discussion left off the table.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shazida, for your comments, and Jack for the excellent question. So I guess to be very honest, I find myself to become more and more of a pragmatic philosopher, but I don't want to be a pragmatic philosopher that just pushes the political sort of like questions aside and for various pragmatic or practical reasons would try to bridge different concepts or just like blind themselves to very important social political kind of questions. I want to tell you two reasons maybe for why I thought putting the political questions here for me, at least in this particular work, was quite important. One, as I mentioned, was that for a long time I would really identify as a member of an AI ethics community, and when some particular figures that unfortunately became representatives of those communities would kind of like make some very strange claims about the whole other field that is working on AI safety, and they've never been involved or engaged with that community at all. When I saw those kind of an interaction, I think I just felt that maybe we need to create a sort of a middle ground, which is rooted on like important and like critical conceptual clarifications. So, for example, Shazida has been a person that studied these communities. She interviews these people, and then whatever she says are rooted in her findings. And she has a very rigid methodological agenda in mind, and based on that, she analyzes AI safety, AI alignment, etc. as I mentioned one name, but there are also other people. There are other people that even when you mention the word existential risk, they kind of like cancel you from that particular community. And it's, for me, this was actually a quite a kind of a sad observation that like for a long time, AI ethics community was a community very much focused on like critical computing. There's been all amazing peer-reviewed venues and conferences where we would go present and work, be open to criticism. We formed wonderful communities. And then at some point, maybe it was a mistake of Twitter or these people spending so much time on Twitter and other media. It all became about like naming the bad communities and just like questioning everything they're doing because they are EAs or because they're long-termists, etc. Now, I happen to actually know some people who came out of the effective altruist community, AI researchers, but are very much worried about the future of AI. They're not working in tech corporations, they're not working in AI labs, but they have these genuine worries about the future of humanity and artificial intelligence. And I spent months with these people in order to really understand why and why they're worried, where is the roots of these worries. I'm not a sociologist, so I didn't study them, but from these types of interactions with these researchers, I actually figured that there is something positive to say about the importance of safety. And I also found myself worried that in some privileged countries that we can't unfortunately name, the conception of AI safety has become associated with existential risk, with effective altruism, and as a result, very important political figures completely ignore talking about the safety of AI systems because there's this sort of an association. So various different reasons, I think, really motivated me to think about analyzing the notion of AI safety maybe from a I would say more apolitical standpoint. That's what we did in this paper. Now, you could say we can't put aside the political questions in general if you want to really understand AI safety. I think that's a very fair point. And as a result, I just, again, as I mentioned in my talk, but I want to again emphasize what I presented is just one specific perspective or snapshot into a very complex concept. And so no one should say or take for granted that what I said is the right way to talk about or think about AI safety. But it's been just one way to suggest that actually AI safety needs to be understood. The empirical content of AI safety research is a topic, is an object of study. And one other very interesting thing was that after I wrote a draft of this paper, I shared it with some of my AI safety friends or friends from AI safety community. They told me what you have analyzed is not AI safety. And I found that comment very interesting because I'm just like, okay, actually you're giving more reasons to claim that what we found is AI safety, but it's not AI safety the way you want AI safety to be, but actually it's AI safety. It's how engineers have thought about AI safety. So that's another thing I thought.
Can you just finish that thought, Atoosa, out of interest, and say, so what did they think AI safety was, if not what you'd found?
Yeah, so what they do basically, I think most of the times also there is no, I guess as Shahzada mentioned, and it's really because that community has been very close-minded to peer review for very long. And so I always, I think all academics are aware of the problems with the peer review system. But after studying and working with that community, I started realizing how important is peer review system. The most important value of peer review is that you need to be epistemically humble because you need to situate your work in relation to the works of other people. You need to give justifications for why you're adopting a particular definition. And that is not what a community typically does when they only discuss ideas on blog posts or non-peer-reviewed venues.
Great. On that note, there was another aspect of your paper, Atoosa, that I wanted to highlight because I think it also connects to Shahzadeh's presentation in an interesting way. Because you spoke about definitions, but you also showed, I think, some very interesting findings relating to methods. So methods for the evaluation assessment of AI safety. And I was really struck by something that in my head I started describing as computer scientists using computer science methods to evaluate computer science inventions. And that, you could understand that as a degree of self-referentiality, not just in terms of how AI safety is defined, but how it is evaluated, that it's a very sort of closed circuit kind of undertaking. And, it linked for me with Shazidah's remarks about, the emphasis on computability, somehow preferably AI-related risk and or normative aspects are operationalized so to bring them within the domain of computability. So I wondered if you could both reflect on that and also what you think the implications are for the wider public relevance of these evaluative practices and regimes, because of course we know that in other areas of technoscience, risk evaluation in some historical periods became really important as a kind of informant and focus of wider public debates about the place of technoscience in society. So yeah, maybe first Atoosa and then Shazidah, if you could comment, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So fantastic question. I guess I have two things. One, because of like resource limitations, we adopted a computational methodology. Some of the tools that we used actually cluster different concepts according to supervised learning methods, and you can raise all types of questions about the validity of those clusters. And so what we did, again, we were just dealing with 350 papers. Me and my student went through all of the papers, read the abstract. We didn't have time to read full papers. We read the abstract, skimmed through introduction, read the conclusions, and we kind of like trusted, again, because they were peer reviewed, that there's a validity in our judgment about the papers given this limited readings. But because we did not have I didn't have other sources, I didn't have other research assistants, it was not feasible. Like we could not run this project without using computational sources. As you mentioned very correctly, when you use computational sources, you trust the computational tool to give you or extract information or give you interesting inferences about a super loaded space that everything, you just put the topic, the paper of Shahzadeh and myself like next to each other, and then just like, oh my God, how do these things connect to one another? We are both studying one term from very, very different perspectives. Like I think both are kind of valid, right? So when the topic is very hard, there's like politically loaded, socially loaded, financially loaded, computationally loaded, all of that, what would a computational analysis really tell us? I think computational analysis gives us a high-level picture and brings attention to, okay, two things on that. One, I have to say, it is very sad to say that as an engineer, but this is a truth that we have to accept. If you want to make an argument for a group of computer scientists, there are two options. One is you go with like the best philosophical, like sociological arguments. It's like, this is it, I've done the best kind of analysis. The other one, you just show them some empirical results. I would say 95% of the time, they remember the empirical results because they're not used to thinking philosophically, sociologically about the problem. So maybe one
I'm just going to briefly interrupt. So because I'm aware we have 2 minutes left, and I just want to make sure Shazidah also will have a chance. Absolutely. Just so you know. Yeah.
Right. I was enjoying that. But I think I misunderstood the question, the computability piece, but I'll answer it in the way that I understood it, because in the interest of time. So I'm a sucker for punishment, and some of the papers we're reading in the value alignment space, the introduction, conclusion, et cetera, it's not enough. And thankfully we're a team of like 5, so we can go deeper. And the limitations, I think, sections when these papers have them are so interesting because they show you if this is if people are aware and willing to say, like, we understand that, human social interaction is more dynamic. We understand that, like, sometimes the values will be things spun off from like anthropic research. So a lot of these papers will hone in on helpfulness, harmlessness, right? Or sometimes they'll pick something like conciseness. The limitation section, I think, like shows you where people think the limits of computation are. And often it's the assumption that like all of this is computable, all of this is formalizable, name a value, we can formalize it. There's a really interesting paper coming out of Anthropic called Values in the Wild that actually use like real chat logs. And they make this claim that there are AI native values, that the chatbot itself has inherent values. They acknowledge like part of this is learned from constitutional AI, like this is partially what we told Claude to do. But look at all of these other values that emerge, right? A kind of epistemic humility, a kind of like, empathy, whatever. And again, I think it's just so interesting. The computability question is really important to look at there because I think people are losing sight of the horizon sometimes. And I want to go many beats back to when Atoosa talked about like all of this reaffirming why peer review is important is also like counterfactuals. I think this work, when it considers counterfactuals, only considers it within the terms of like what field they think they're in or what literature they're drawing from. And I've, from the start, encouraged more interdisciplinary reading and engagement in this space because you end up with better counterfactuals. You end up like thinking through what part of my work actually doesn't really hold based on some other field and another tradition of producing.
Thanks so much. We're going to bring it to an end here. And yeah, I'm sure we could keep going for much longer. It's really great to have both your contributions in conversation also with everyone here. So thank you, everyone. And I think this is the close of the webinar series, which is quite a moment, but there may well be more, I understand. So yeah, we hope to continue this in this or related forms coming period.
Thanks
Bye-bye,
for
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
folks.
Thank you so much.